This is a video to run through some of the basic steps for getting working with data files in a spreadsheet, and particularly in Google Sheets. So the first place we are going to go is we're going to have a look at the file that we're using for this exercise, which is the number of people on the electoral register for UK parliamentary elections. And that's this file here. Now there's a link to that file in the video description. If you can't find it, it should also be on the Google Drive, but the short bit.ly link should bring you there. And when you download that file, and let me just show you what it looks like. So you get to bit.ly.parl reg 2020, you follow that, and you should end up with a file in the Google Drive and a little download button here. Okay, so we download that and we get the file here. Now this file ends in .csv. Now if you double click on this, your computer will pick something to open it with, probably a spreadsheet program, maybe a text editor, maybe a Word program. We don't know. But what we want to do is open it in your text editor, which might be, for example, if we right click on this, we have an option, this is on a Mac, to use text edit, right, which is a text editor. There's a few others called TextMate or Atom, but text editor, Notepad, there's another. But your first job is to establish what is the text editor on your machine. And so open it with that, and you get something that looks like this. Actually, when you download it, it'll probably look like that. So it's a bunch of data, and if you make a line after, let's blow this up a bit bigger. There we go. If you make a line after the first line, you can see that we have something called code. We have the parliamentary constituency type, and then electoral registrations as of December 2020. That's what that means. And then what follows is entries under that. So for example, here is a code, here's a parliamentary constituency, here's a constituency type, and here's a number of people on the electoral register. So that's what our file looks like. The CSV at the end refers to comma separated values, because each of the values, as you can see, is separated by a comma, except maybe for this one, which is not actually being counted for separation because it's counted as part of this unit. So that's what our file looks like before we do anything with it. So we can close that, and then we can go to our Google Drive, and we can say we want to make a new file, and we're going to ask for a new spreadsheet. And then when we have our spreadsheet, we are going to go to File, then Import, and once it's done that, we're going to go to Upload, which is here. Select the file from your device, and then we're going to select the file that we're interested in importing. There are several ways of doing this. You can have files that are on your drive. You can share files with people, all sorts of things, as you probably know if you're familiar with Google Documents and Drives. So as we import our file, it wants to know, should it replace existing spreadsheet? We just needed to insert a new sheet. It's probably enough. And then it wants to know if it should detect the separator automatically, which it's usually good at doing, but sometimes you can run into problems. So why don't we tell it exactly what the separator is? As we've seen, the separator is a comma. All the different things on each line are separated by commas. Okay, and let's import that and see what happens. So there we go. There is our file that we saw a moment ago in a text editor, now in a spreadsheet. Now the first thing we do before we do anything else is we go down to this tab here, which is for a sheet, and we right click on this and we get an option to duplicate. Okay, and we duplicate that, and now we have a copy. Okay, And these tabs down here, for example, you can do lots of things with them. You can right click on the one that was there and you can delete it because we don't need it. You can double click and you can rename this. So I'm going to call this original. That was the first one we imported. You can also right click, I imagine, and find rename. You can. And we're going to call this data. The other thing we'll do is we'll add a new tab, right, or add a new sheet rather, which will appear as a tab. So let's have a new sheet, and let's double click and rename and call this source. Now, the source, you can either put in the shortcut I gave you, which is in the description, or you can look for the original, but I'll put that in the description as well if you want to paste that into your spreadsheet, so you can put it in like that. But the main thing is that in this you put in enough so that you can find where you got the data. What you don't want is to be opening it up in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks and wondering where did these numbers come from. Another good thing to do perhaps is to say downloaded September 20, 2021, because this stuff gets updated. And also in this case there's several batches of data, so we should say it was the December 2020 spreadsheet that we took. There we go. So now we know where the stuff came from, which is kind of crucial. Okay, so here's our data. We've imported our data. And we've reorganized our tabs, as you saw, just by grabbing them and moving them around so that they sit the way we want them to, or not, as the case may be. There we go. So what do we need to do? Because it's still a little bit messy. Well, this empty line shouldn't be here, so we're going to select it, right click and delete the row. Then you'll find that you typically need to resize these columns, which you can do depending on the column names or perhaps what's in the columns. Often what you get sometimes when you import these things is maybe the thing is a bit of a shambles and they're all squeezed up like this. If you select several columns, you can resize the lot. So we're resizing one and they all move to the same distance. One of the handiest things to do is to rename these. So code, constituency, type, and electoral register December 2020. There we go. So there is our data. We have a problem now though, because as soon as we start moving through it, we lose this rather crucial first row with the names of the columns. You can resize, just as you can resize the columns, you can resize the rows. So let's resize the first row, as it's important. And now we want to freeze the first row. So we go to View, Freeze, one row. There we go. And now we have our headers no matter where we are. We can select these 4 cells and do Command B or Control B if you like. And we should also name this. Okay, so let's call it Electoral Register December 2020. Now we've sized these columns, but we might have more columns. Okay, there's just 4, but sometimes you get a lot more columns than you need. Oh, I've made a mistake here, because you can see I thought I was working on the data, and in fact I was working on the original, so we'll have to rename these. I've done it backwards, so that's the original data. And this is the one that I'm cleaning up. Okay, so you might find, for example, that this column you don't need. Now, that means you can right click and hide the column. And so now you see you've got column A, B, D, because column C is there, but we can't see it. If you want to unhide it, select B and D, right click and unhide, and it reappears. You might also simply decide to delete the column. That was a bit drastic, but it works. Control Z or Command Z. If it's a mistake, we'll bring it back. But of course, we have the original data here. So if we needed to get it back, we could. So those are our columns: hidden, unhidden, deleted, resized. Now the next important thing we need to do is to be able to move around this spreadsheet. Our initial instinct is usually to start scrolling through them, but while that might work because we have 650 here, so we'll eventually get to the bottom, it's not very practical if you have 6,500. So what you want is to use Command and the down arrow, or Control and the down arrow if it's on a PC, and you can jump to the bottom. And you see that we're in row 651 because we've got a row at the top for the headings. So we've got 650 constituencies, as we'd expect. And then we can use Command up arrow and jump back up. Now the sheet doesn't adjust itself, so you might want to come down one row, and then it lines up at row 2, visible. So you can jump down, and then again Command, but with the right arrow you can jump across, you can jump back up, and you can jump to the left, and so on. This becomes particularly important if you add the Shift button in on your keyboard. So Command, down arrow, and Shift. You've done the same thing, except you've selected everything. Okay, so you can also do that and then move to the right, and you get everything selected. Now, if you ever let's see, if you ever need to do a calculation, one of the fastest ways is to select everything. So I'm going to do Command down, Command with Shift, down arrow, and then down here on the bottom right you're going to see that there are calculations carried out automatically by the spreadsheet. And here it tells me that it's done a count of everything I've selected, and it's 650. Now it doesn't do any other calculations because all it has is bits of text. However, if we were to go over here where we have numbers, and we were to select all of those numbers, again Command, down arrow, Shift, we get a series of calculations which we can choose using a little drop down menu here. So it's giving us an average, a minimum, so the smallest number in the selection, the biggest number, how many there are, 650, and it also does a sum, so that's 46 million altogether. That's extremely useful for getting fast, rough calculation. Well, they're not rough, but initial answers to number questions. Now, the one other thing you might want to do early on with numbers is, if we come back up the top, you might decide that you don't have enough decimal points, or that, as more often happens, you have too many decimal points. And up here you'll find these little menu buttons. This will increase. So you're unlikely to want to do this, but sometimes you get data coming in and it's got lots and lots of decimal points, and you either you want just 2 decimal points or you want none, and so you can reduce them by using the corresponding button on the left, and that makes everything a lot easier to follow. So here's our data. We can get some calculations for it. We can select a batch of things, like let's see how many places we have starting with A, and we can see down here we've got a count of 9. Those places beginning with A, how many voters do they have? 676,000, and so on. So what else can we do? We can do Control F or Command F, and we can say, I'd like to see if there is anything here with Cardiff in it. And you can see that we have got 4. That's the first of 4 is Cardiff Central, second of 4 is Cardiff North, and Cardiff South, and Penarth, and Cardiff West. There is more advanced Control F. If you're familiar with Control F, you can search case sensitive and more complicated more complicated searches, but we won't worry about that for now. The main thing to know is that you can look something up with the Control F immediately. Now another thing you might want to do is to sort. So what do I mean by sort? Let's go back up the top, and we can see that our spreadsheet is organized in terms of constituency. So down the bottom we finish on West Tyrone, although that's within, it's initially sorted by code for Northern Ireland, Scotland, and so on. So let's say we want to organize it by let's organize it by type. So I want it sorted with all the B types followed by all the C types. So we can say sort the sheet from A to Z, and you'll see that all the B's are at the top and all the C's are at the bottom. If we go to constituency, we can say let's sort it from Z to A, and then we see that we start with York and we finish with the A's. And then we could go to the code and we say I'd like it to start with all the E's. So we'll sort it alphabetically from A to Z, and then it starts with the E's and it should finish with the W's. And then of course the very interesting sorting goes on with the numbers. Okay, sort A to Z, and that gives us from the smallest to the biggest, so 109,000. If we want to see it the other direction, it's always it can be a bit strange with numbers because obviously they're not alphabetical. So let's try Z to A, and then we have from the biggest to the smallest. So that's sorting, and that becomes very useful if you combine it with filtering. So let's do some filtering. So for this, we go to Data and create a filter. And when you do that, you get these little drop-down triangles that appear. And once you do that, you can go in and filter and say, well, that's not a good example as advanced filtering. Okay, let's have just, so we're going to have just the type B, which is boroughs, just the type B areas. There we go. And you can see in the row numbers that there are rows that have disappeared, right? 4 and 5 is gone, and we only have the B's. Okay. Now we can turn off the filter, and everything returns. Now we're going to put the filter back on, so up to Data, Filter, and this time we'll go to Code, and here you can see that we'd be a long time selecting all the E's or all the W's. So we're going to filter by condition. We're going to say text starts with W. And that will give us all the constituencies, should give us all the constituencies in Wales. And so let's see, what do we have? So now, for example, I want to see how many rows are still left. The way to do this is, as we just saw, Command down arrow with Shift. That will select everything. And then over here on the bottom right, it tells me how many are in my selection. There are 40, which is what I'd expect. And there we go. And then we might want to turn off our filter. There we go.